I was standing in my garage-turned-studio when I heard the doorbell ring like someone was trying to press it through the wall, and I knew immediately that something was about to go wrong in my otherwise peaceful Tuesday afternoon. I wiped the sawdust off my hands and walked through my house in Beaverton, Oregon, wondering who could possibly be this aggressive with a doorbell at 2 in the afternoon. When I opened the door, I found myself face to face with a woman who looked like she had been personally offended by the existence of oxygen itself. "Are you Jason Daniels?" she asked, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "That's me," I said, trying to keep my tone friendly, even though alarm bells were already going off in my head. "I'm Patricia Henderson, president of the Meadowbrook HOA," she announced, holding a clipboard like it was a weapon. "We've received multiple complaints about illegal commercial activity being conducted from your residence." I blinked at her, genuinely confused for a moment. Then it clicked. My studio. I had converted my 2-car garage into a woodworking studio about 8 months ago, and I used it to create custom furniture pieces that I sold online. Everything was completely legal. I had all my permits, my business license, and I had even checked with the city to make sure I was following every single rule. "I run a small furniture business," I explained calmly, "but everything is licensed and permitted. I'm not violating any laws." Patricia's face hardened even more, which I hadn't thought was possible. "The Meadowbrook HOA bylaws clearly state that no commercial businesses may be operated from residential properties. You're in direct violation of Section 12, Paragraph 4. "Can I see that?" I asked, reaching for the clipboard. She pulled it back like I was trying to steal her firstborn child. "This is HOA property. You'll receive your official notice of violation in the mail within 3 business days. You have 14 days from receipt to cease all commercial operations or face fines of $500 per day." My stomach dropped. $500 per day? That was insane. My furniture business was just starting to take off. I had orders lined up for the next 2 months, and I was finally making enough to justify the time and energy I had put into building this dream. "Look, I really think there's been a misunderstanding," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I specifically made sure I was following all the rules before I started. I even have a home occupation permit from the city." "City permits don't override HOA bylaws," Patricia said with a smile that made my skin crawl. "You should have read your covenants more carefully before you decided to turn your home into a factory." "It's not a factory," I protested. "It's a 1-person woodworking studio. I don't have employees, I don't have customers coming to the house, and I don't create any disturbance to the neighborhood." "The noise from your power tools has been reported by at least 3 neighbors," she countered. "That constitutes a disturbance." I wanted to argue that I only ran my tools during reasonable hours and that I had never received a direct complaint from any neighbor, but Patricia was already turning away. 14 days, Mr. Daniels. The clock starts when you receive the official notice." She walked down my driveway with the confidence of someone who had never been told no in her entire life. I stood there for a moment, my mind racing. This couldn't be happening. I had been so careful. I had done everything right. I closed the door and immediately went to my home office, pulling out the thick folder where I kept all my business documents. Business license from the state of Oregon, check. Home occupation permit from the city of Beaverton, check. Tax registration, insurance, everything was there and everything was current. Then I pulled out the HOA documents that I had received when I bought the house 3 years ago. I had read through them at the time, but I admitted to myself now that I hadn't exactly memorized every single clause. The document was 47 pages of dense legal language, and I started flipping through it with growing anxiety. I found Section 12. It was titled Commercial Use Restrictions. My eyes scanned the paragraphs and my heart sank as I read Paragraph 4. "No lot or residence shall be used for any commercial purpose, including but not limited to retail sales, professional services, or manufacturing operations." Damn it! There it was in black and white. But wait. I kept reading. Paragraph 7 stated, "Home occupations that comply with city and county regulations and do not create a nuisance or disturbance to neighboring properties may be permitted with prior written approval from the HOA board." Prior written approval. I didn't have that, but I also hadn't known I needed it. When I had applied for my home occupation permit from the city, Nobody had mentioned anything about needing HOA approval. I had assumed, clearly incorrectly, that city approval was sufficient. I spent the rest of the afternoon researching Oregon law regarding HOAs and home businesses. What I found was both encouraging and frustrating. Oregon had actually passed laws in recent years that limited HOA power over home-based businesses, specifically to encourage entrepreneurship and recognize the changing nature of work. The problem was that these laws had exceptions and nuances that made everything complicated. The notice arrived in my mailbox exactly 3 days later, just as Patricia had promised. It was a formal letter on Meadowbrook HOA letterhead, complete with the same language she had delivered in person, plus additional threats about liens on my property if the fines weren't paid. At the bottom was a date for a hearing before the HOA board in 10 days. I called my friend Marcus that evening. He was a real estate attorney, though not one who specialized in HOA law. We had gone to college together at Portland State University, and he was one of the few people I trusted completely. "Jason, buddy, you've stepped in it," Marcus said after I explained the situation. "HOAs are notoriously difficult to fight, especially in Oregon where they have a lot of power." "But I have a city permit," I argued. "Doesn't that count for something?" "It counts for something with the city," Marcus replied. "But when you bought your house, you voluntarily entered into a contract with the HOA. Those bylaws are legally binding. Think of it like you signed a contract saying you wouldn't do something, and now you're doing it." "So I'm just screwed?" I asked, feeling defeated. "Cheat." "Not necessarily," Marcus said slowly. "You said there's a provision for home occupations with approval, right? Your argument could be that you were operating in good faith, that you obtained all required governmental permits, and that you should be granted retroactive approval because you meet all the actual requirements. Will that work? Honestly? Probably not. HOA boards can be petty and vindictive, but it's your best shot. You need to document everything. Prove that you're not creating any disturbance, that you're following all laws and regulations, and that you're a model homeowner in every other respect. Make them look unreasonable if they deny you." I spent the next week preparing for the hearing like I was preparing for trial. I gathered noise measurements from a decibel meter I bought online, showing that my tools were no louder than a vacuum cleaner or lawnmower. I collected statements from my immediate neighbors, knocking on doors and explaining the situation. To my surprise and relief, most of them were supportive. Mrs. Chen next door said she had never been bothered by any noise. The Ramirez family on the other side said they thought it was great that I was pursuing my passion. The only holdout was Donald Morrison across the street, who refused to talk to me and shut his door in my face. I compiled photos of my studio, showing that it looked like a residential garage from the outside. I gathered my online reviews, showing that my business was legitimate and professional. I even got a letter from my insurance company confirming that my policy covered my home-based business operations and that I posed no additional risk to the neighborhood. The night before the hearing, I barely slept. I kept rehearsing what I would say, how I would present my case. I had everything organized in a 3-ring binder with tabs and labels. Marcus had offered to come with me for moral support, but I told him I needed to do this myself. The HOA board meeting was held in the community center clubhouse, a bland beige building next to the neighborhood pool. I arrived 15 minutes early with my binder and a knot in my stomach. The room was set up like a courtroom, with a long table at the front for the board members and chairs arranged in rows for residents. I took a seat in the front row and waited. Patricia Henderson arrived exactly at 7, along with 4 other board members. There was Gerald Thompson, an older man with a gray beard who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. Next to him was Susan Martinez, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes who smiled at me briefly. Then came Bradley Foster, a younger guy, probably in his 30s, who had the energy of someone trying too hard to be important. Finally, there was Margaret Willis, who looked like Patricia's slightly older, slightly meaner sister. "This meeting of the Meadowbrook HOA board is now called to order," Patricia announced, banging a gavel like she was auditioning for a TV show. "We have one item of business tonight, the violation hearing for Jason Daniels of 847 Maple Grove Drive." She said my address like it was a crime scene. "Mr. Daniels, You've been given notice that you're operating an illegal commercial business from your residence in violation of our bylaws. You have the opportunity to address the board before we make our decision. Please proceed. I stood up, my binder in hand, and walked to the small podium that had been set up facing the board table. My hands were shaking slightly, but I forced my voice to stay steady. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, I began. I want to start by saying that I have tremendous respect for this board and the work you do to maintain our community. I'm not here to fight or cause problems. I'm here to explain my situation and hopefully reach a reasonable solution. Patricia's expression didn't change, but Susan Martinez nodded encouragingly. 8 months ago, I converted my garage into a woodworking studio. Before doing this, I did extensive research into the legal requirements. I obtained a home occupation permit from the city of Beaverton, which required me to demonstrate that my business would not create any disturbance to the neighborhood, would not have customers or employees coming to the property, and would not alter the residential character of my home. I opened my binder and held up my city permit. I have that permit here. I also have my business license, my tax registration, and my insurance documentation. I followed every rule that was presented to me by the city and county. But you didn't follow HOA rules, Patricia interrupted. That's what we're here to discuss. You're absolutely right, I said, refusing to let her rattle me. I made a mistake. When I was researching the legal requirements, I focused on governmental regulations and didn't realize that I needed separate HOA approval. That was my error, and I take full responsibility for that oversight. I flipped to another tab in my binder. However, I believe that I meet all the criteria that would qualify my business for approval under Section 12, Paragraph 7 of our bylaws. This provision allows home occupations that comply with regulations and don't create disturbances. I have documented evidence that my business creates no disturbance to neighbors. I proceeded to walk through my evidence, the noise measurements, the neighbor statements, the photos showing that my property looked entirely residential from the outside. I explained that I had no customers visiting, no employees, no deliveries beyond normal personal mail and occasional packages. I showed my online business model, demonstrating that everything was conducted remotely. I've also brought letters of support from several neighbors, I continued, pulling out the statements from Mrs. Chen and the Ramirez family. The people who actually live next to me have no objection to my business. In fact, they're supportive of it. Bradley Foster leaned forward. What about the noise complaints? We received reports from multiple residents. I'd like to know who made those complaints, I said calmly, because I've personally spoken with every house within 200 feet of mine, and only one neighbor refused to speak with me. If there are noise complaints, I'd like the opportunity to address them directly with those neighbors and find solutions. Patricia and Margaret exchanged a glance that told me everything I needed to know. The complaints probably came from them or from neighbors they had prompted. That information is confidential, Patricia said curtly. Residents have the right to make complaints without fear of retaliation. I'm not talking about retaliation, I said, keeping my voice level. I'm talking about being a good neighbor. If someone has a legitimate complaint, I want to address it, but I need to know what the specific issue is. Gerald Thompson, who had been silent until now, spoke up in a gravelly voice. Son, what kind of furniture do you make? The question caught me off guard. Mostly custom pieces. Dining tables, bookshelves, entertainment centers. Things that people want made to fit their specific spaces. And you make a living at this? He asked, sounding genuinely curious. I'm getting there, I admitted. It's not full-time income yet, but it's growing. I'm making enough that it's a real business, not just a hobby. Gerald nodded slowly. I used to do some woodworking myself. It's honest work. Patricia shot him a look that could have frozen lava. The issue isn't whether it's honest work, Gerald. The issue is that it's commercial activity in a residential zone. But it's not really commercial in the traditional sense, Susan Martinez chimed in. He's not running a storefront or a factory. From what he's shown us, it sounds like he's just working in his garage. The bylaws are clear, Margaret Willis said sharply, speaking for the first time. Her voice was even more nasal than Patricia's. No commercial activity, period. If we make an exception for him, we'll have to make exceptions for everyone. What exceptions? I asked. Is anyone else asking to run a home business? That's not the point, Patricia snapped. The point is precedent. We can't just ignore our own rules because someone asks nicely. I'm not asking you to ignore the rules, I countered, feeling my frustration rising but trying to keep it in check. I'm asking you to apply the provision that already exists in the rules for exactly this situation. Paragraph 7 specifically allows for home occupations with approval. I'm simply requesting that approval. Which you should have done before you started your business, Patricia said triumphantly, like she had just won a debate championship. You're absolutely right, I agreed, refusing to give her the argument she wanted. I should have, I made a mistake. But denying my request now doesn't serve any purpose except to punish me for that mistake. I'm not harming anyone. I'm not disrupting anything. I'm just a guy trying to build a small business from his garage. Bradley Foster was tapping his pen on the table, looking thoughtful. What happens if we deny your request? Will you shut down your business? It was a loaded question, and we both knew it. I chose my words carefully. I would explore all my legal options. I've invested significant time and money into this business. I have customers depending on me. I wouldn't give it up without understanding exactly what my rights are. That sounds like a threat, Margaret said, her eyes narrowing. It's not a threat, I said firmly. It's a statement of fact. I believe I have legitimate legal arguments under Oregon law that protect home-based businesses. I'd prefer not to go down that road. I'd prefer to work cooperatively with this board. But I'm not going to just roll over if I think an injustice is being done. The room went silent for a moment. Patricia's jaw was clenched so tight I thought her teeth might crack. The board will deliberate and provide our decision within 5 business days, she finally said. This hearing is adjourned. I gathered my binder and left the clubhouse feeling like I had just run a marathon. I had no idea which way the decision would go, but I had done everything I could. Marcus called me the next morning. How did it go? Hard to say, I told him. I made my case. Some of them seemed receptive, but Patricia and her sidekick Margaret clearly have it out for me. Listen, Jason, I did some more research last night, Marcus said. Oregon Revised Statute 94.640 actually limits HOA restrictions on home-based businesses. If your business complies with local regulations and doesn't create a nuisance, the HOA's ability to restrict it is limited. Are you serious? I felt a surge of hope. Dead serious. The law was passed a few years ago specifically because HOAs were being too restrictive and hurting people trying to work from home. You have a legitimate legal argument here. Why didn't you mention this before? Because I wanted you to try the diplomatic approach first, Marcus explained. Going in with legal threats right away would have turned them against you immediately. But if they deny you, you've got ammunition for the next round. What's the next round? You appeal their decision, and if that doesn't work, you can file a complaint in circuit court. It's not quick or cheap, but you'd have a solid case. I felt better knowing I had options, but I still hoped it wouldn't come to that. The next few days crawled by. I tried to focus on my work, completing a custom bookshelf for a client in Seattle and starting on a dining table for a family in Eugene. Every time I heard a noise outside, I wondered if it was Patricia or one of her spies checking to see if I was still operating. The letter arrived on the 4th day, not the 5th. I saw it in the mailbox when I got home from the hardware store, and my heart started pounding. I sat down at my kitchen table before opening it. Dear Mr. Daniels, it began. After careful consideration of your request for retroactive approval of your home-based business, the Meadowbrook HOA Board of Directors has voted to deny your request. You are hereby ordered to cease all commercial operations from your residence within 14 days of the date of this letter. Failure to comply will result in fines of $500 per day and potential legal action to place a lien on your property. You have the right to appeal this decision within 30 days. 3 of the 5 board members had voted against me. Only Gerald Thompson and Susan Martinez had voted in my favor. I sat there staring at the letter for a long time. Part of me wanted to just give up, to pack up my tools and find some other solution. Maybe I could rent a small studio space somewhere, though that would eat into my profits significantly. But the larger part of me was angry. This wasn't fair. I hadn't done anything wrong except make a procedural mistake, and they were treating me like I had committed a crime. I called Marcus. They denied me. I figured they might, he said. Do you want to fight this? What are my realistic chances? In court? Pretty good, actually. The law is on your side. The problem is time and money. You're looking at several months and probably a few $1,000s in legal fees, even with me giving you a discount. I did some quick mental math. If I kept my business running and they actually enforced the fines, I'd owe them $7,000 after the first 2 weeks, $15,000 after a month. But if they were bluffing about enforcement, I could keep operating while I fought the battle legally. What if I just ignore them and keep working? I asked. They'll fine you, and eventually they'll put a lien on your house, Marcus said. But here's the thing. To enforce those fines, they'd have to take you to court, and that's where you could bring up the Oregon statute that protects you. It's risky, but it might force their hand. Or it might cost me my house, I pointed out. It won't come to that, Marcus assured me. Long before they could actually foreclose on a lien, we'd have our day in court. But Jason, there might be a smarter play here. What's that? File a formal appeal of their decision. In your appeal, explicitly cite Oregon Revised Statute 94.640 and make it clear that you believe they're violating state law. That might be enough to scare them into backing down without having to go to court. And if it doesn't scare them, then we file in circuit court and we win. But let's try the appeal first. Give me a day to draft something airtight. I spent that evening doing more research on the Oregon statute Marcus had mentioned. The more I read, the more convinced I became that I was in the right. The law specifically stated that HOAs could not prohibit home-based businesses that complied with local regulations unless the business created a significant disturbance or nuisance. It even defined what constituted a nuisance: excessive noise, traffic, parking issues, or other problems that substantially interfered with neighbors' use and enjoyment of their properties. I had none of those issues. My business was quiet. I had no customers visiting. My vehicles were parked in my driveway just like always. There was no legitimate reason to shut me down, except that Patricia Henderson didn't like the idea of someone running a business from their home. Marcus sent me the draft appeal the next afternoon. It was 5 pages of carefully crafted legal language that essentially said, "You're wrong, here's why, and if you don't reconsider, we'll see you in court." He cited the relevant statutes, referenced case law from other Oregon HOA disputes, and laid out a clear argument for why my business should be permitted. "This is perfect," I told him after reading it twice. "How much do I owe you?" "Buy me a beer sometime," Marcus said. "I'm serious about this, Jason. What they're doing is wrong, and I think it's important to fight it. Too many HOAs abuse their power, and people just give up because fighting seems too hard." I printed the appeal on official letterhead that Marcus provided from his law firm, signed it, and sent it via certified mail to the HOA board. Then, I did something that felt rebellious. I went out to my studio and got back to work on the dining table I was building. If they wanted to fine me, let them try. I wasn't going to stop working while this played out. 3 days later, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Mr. Daniels, this is Susan Martinez from the HOA board." I sat up straighter. "Hello, Susan. I wanted to call you personally because I think what's happening is wrong," she said, her voice low like she was worried about being overheard. "I voted in favor of approving your business, and so did Gerald. We're outnumbered, but I wanted you to know that not everyone on the board is against you." "I appreciate that," I said, genuinely touched. "Can I ask what the chances are that they'll reconsider on appeal?" "Honestly, not good. Patricia's dug in on this. She sees it as a matter of principle. She thinks that if she lets you operate, then everyone will want to run businesses from their homes, and the neighborhood will lose its residential character." "That's a slippery slope argument," I said, "and it's not based on any actual evidence." "I know," Susan agreed. "But Patricia doesn't care about evidence. She cares about control. She's been HOA president for 6 years, and she runs this board like it's her personal kingdom." "So what do I do?" There was a pause. "Keep fighting. Your appeal was really well written. I think you actually have a legal case. Gerald and I will support you, but we can't outvote the other 3. You might need to take this above the board level." That's what my attorney said. Good. You have an attorney. That's smart. Susan hesitated. There's something else you should know. Patricia has been talking to the other board members about accelerating the fine schedule if you don't comply. She wants to make an example of you. My stomach dropped. What does that mean, accelerate the fine schedule? Instead of 500 per day, she wants to increase it to 1,000 per day after the first week, then 2,000 per day after 2 weeks. The bylaws give her the authority to do that in cases of willful non-compliance. Jesus, I muttered. This is insane. I'm telling you this off the record, Susan said. If anyone asks, we never had this conversation. But I think you deserve to know what you're up against. Thank you, Susan. Seriously. After we hung up, I immediately called Marcus and told him about the escalating fines. That's aggressive, Marcus said, sounding concerned for the first time. They're trying to make it financially impossible for you to fight them. Even if you eventually win in court, you'd be looking at massive fines in the meantime. So what do? I can't afford to pay thousands of dollars per day. They can't collect those fines without a judgment, Marcus explained. They can threaten them, but to actually get the money, they'd have to take you to court. And once we're in court, we can argue that the fines are punitive and unreasonable. But Jason, this is getting serious. Are you sure you want to keep fighting? I thought about it. Really thought about it. My furniture business was more than just income to me. It was the first time in my adult life that I had felt truly passionate about my work. I had spent 10 years working corporate jobs that slowly sucked the life out of me, and I had finally found something that made me excited to wake up in the morning. Patricia Henderson wasn't going to take that away from me just because she had a power trip. I'm sure, I told Marcus. Let's do whatever we need to do. All right, I'm going to prepare a preemptive filing with the circuit court. If they deny your appeal or try to enforce these escalated fines, we'll already have the groundwork laid to challenge them immediately. In the meantime, I need you to document everything, every hour you work, every project you complete, every interaction with the HOA. We need to build a record that shows you're a reasonable person being unreasonably targeted. The appeal hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later, again at the community center clubhouse. This time, I wasn't nervous, I was angry. Controlled, focused anger that made me feel sharp and clear-headed. The hearing format was similar to the first one, except this time, Marcus came with me. When Patricia saw him, her expression soured even further. Mr. Daniels, I see you've brought legal representation, she said, making it sound like an insult. This is Marcus Chen, my attorney, I said calmly. Given the serious nature of the fines you're threatening, I thought it was appropriate. Marcus nodded professionally to the board. Good evening. I'm here primarily as an observer, but I may offer clarification on legal points if needed. The hearing proceeded much like the first one, except this time I was armed with more than just documents. I had legal arguments, and Marcus had coached me on exactly how to present them. This board is operating under a misunderstanding of both its own bylaws and Oregon state law, I said, standing at the podium with confidence I didn't entirely feel. Section 12, paragraph 7 of your bylaws explicitly allows for home occupations with board approval. I'm requesting that approval, and I meet every criterion that would justify granting it. We've been through this, Patricia interrupted. We already denied your request. And I'm appealing that denial on the grounds that it's arbitrary, capricious, and contrary to state law, I continued, not letting her derail me. Oregon Revised Statute 94.640 specifically limits HOA authority to restrict home-based businesses. The statute states that an HOA may not prohibit a home-based business unless it creates a nuisance as defined by local ordinance or substantially interferes with other residents' use and enjoyment of their property. I paused to let that sink in. Bradley Foster was actually reading from a printout of the statute that I had included with my appeal documents. My business creates no nuisance, I continued. I've provided noise measurements showing compliance with Beaverton noise ordinances. I've provided statements from immediate neighbors indicating no disturbance. I've shown that there is no traffic, no parking issues, no visual impact on the neighborhood. Under Oregon law, this board does not have the authority to shut down my business. Patricia's face was red now. We have every right to enforce our bylaws. Your bylaws cannot supersede state law, Marcus interjected smoothly. And Oregon courts have consistently held that HOA restrictions must be reasonable and must serve a legitimate purpose. Shutting down a quiet, compliant home business serves no legitimate purpose except to exercise control. This is outrageous, Margaret Willis sputtered. We're being told we can't govern our own community? You can govern your community, Marcus replied, his tone still professional. But you have to do so within the bounds of the law. The law in Oregon is very clear on this point. Home-based businesses that comply with local regulations and create no nuisance are protected. Gerald Thompson cleared his throat. I've been reading the statute Mr. Daniels provided, and it seems pretty straightforward to me. If he's not causing problems, we shouldn't be shutting him down. Gerald, you can't be serious, Patricia said, turning on her fellow board member. I am serious, Gerald said, his gravelly voice firm. I didn't know about this state law when we voted before. But now that I do, I don't think we have a choice. The law protects him. The law protects homeowners from unreasonable restrictions, Susan Martinez added, clearly feeling emboldened by Gerald's support. This seems unreasonable to me. Patricia looked like she was about to explode. We cannot simply ignore 6 years of established policy because someone threatens legal action. I'm not threatening legal action, I said, though of course that was exactly what I was doing. I'm trying to avoid legal action by resolving this through the proper appeal process. But if this board continues to violate my rights under Oregon law, then yes, I will pursue every legal remedy available to me. Bradley Foster set down his pen. I think we need to consult with the HOA attorney before we proceed further. This is more complex than I realized. Finally, someone is making sense, Patricia muttered. She banged her gavel with unnecessary force. This hearing is continued pending legal review. The board will consult with our attorney and reconvene within 30 days. It wasn't the victory I wanted, but it wasn't a loss either. As Marcus and I walked out of the clubhouse, he put a hand on my shoulder. That went well, he said. Really? It felt like a stalemate. That's exactly what it was, and that's good for us. They're scared now. They know they're on shaky legal ground. When their attorney looks at the statute and at your facts, he's going to tell them they'll lose in court. And if he doesn't, then we go to court and we win anyway. But I don't think it'll come to that. Marcus was right, but not in the way either of us expected. About a week after the appeal hearing, I got a call from a different unknown number. This time, it was a man's voice, professional and carefully neutral. Mr. Daniels, this is Robert Fletcher. I'm the attorney for the Meadowbrook HOA. Hello, I said cautiously. I've been reviewing your case, and I've advised the board on the legal issues involved. I wanted to reach out to you directly to see if we can resolve this matter without further conflict. I'm listening. The board is prepared to grant conditional approval for your home-based business, subject to certain restrictions. These would include operating hours, noise limitations, and periodic review to ensure continued compliance. Would you be willing to discuss such an arrangement? I felt a wave of relief so strong I had to sit down. Yes, absolutely. I've been willing to work within reasonable restrictions from the beginning. Excellent. I'm going to draft a proposed agreement and send it to you for review. I'd recommend having your attorney look it over before you sign anything, but I think we can find a solution that works for everyone. Can I ask what changed? There was a pause. Between you and me, Mr. Daniels, the statute you cited is very clear, and you've documented your compliance thoroughly. The board's position was not legally defensible. I advised them that proceeding with fines and enforcement would likely result in a court ordering them to not only allow your business, but also to pay your legal fees. This resolution is much better for everyone involved. When Marcus reviewed the proposed agreement, he had a few suggested changes to protect me from future board overreach. But overall, it was fair. I would be allowed to operate my business indefinitely as long as I maintained the standards I had already been following. No customers visiting the property, noise only during daytime hours, no exterior changes to the property, and an annual review to ensure continued compliance. The final board meeting to approve the agreement was anticlimactic. Patricia Henderson could barely look at me as she read the resolution aloud. Margaret Willis voted against it purely out of spite, but Gerald, Susan, and even Bradley Foster voted in favor. The motion passed 4-1. "Congratulations, Mr. Daniels," Patricia said through gritted teeth. "Your business has been approved." "Thank you," I said, trying not to sound too triumphant. "I appreciate the board working with me to find a reasonable solution." As I left the clubhouse that night, Susan Martinez caught up with me in the parking lot. "I'm glad this worked out," she said, smiling genuinely. "You fought for what was right and you won. That takes courage." "I had help," I said, thinking of Marcus and everyone who had supported me. "And honestly, it shouldn't have been this hard. I wasn't trying to cause problems." "I know. But Patricia sees everything as a battle for control. She can't stand it when someone challenges her authority." Susan glanced back at the clubhouse. "Between you and me, I think this might be the beginning of the end for her presidency. Gerald and I have been talking about nominating someone else for the next election. The board needs new leadership." "Well, good luck with that," I said sincerely. Over the next few months, my business continued to grow. Word spread about the quality of my work, and I started getting more orders than I could handle alone. I hired an assistant, a young woman named Sarah Garrett, who was studying furniture design at Portland Community College. I made sure to document everything with the HOA, showing that even with an assistant, we maintained all the agreed-upon standards. Patricia never spoke to me again beyond terse nods if we happened to cross paths in the neighborhood, but other neighbors started coming by, curious about my work and impressed that I had stood up to the HOA. I ended up making several custom pieces for people in the neighborhood, which felt like a vindication. About 6 months after the final board meeting, Susan Martinez called me with news. "I thought you'd want to know Patricia Henderson resigned as HOA president today." "Really? What happened?" "She got into another dispute with a homeowner about landscaping choices, and this time the homeowner filed a formal complaint against her for harassment. The board voted to remove her rather than deal with potential legal liability. Gerald is taking over as president." "Wow, I almost feel bad for her." "Don't," Susan said firmly. "Patricia brought this on herself. She treated the HOA like her personal fiefdom for years, and she finally pushed too many people too far. Your case was actually the turning point. Once word got around that you had fought back successfully, other homeowners started questioning the board's authority too." "I didn't mean to start a revolution," I said, laughing. "Maybe not, but sometimes revolutions start because one person refuses to be pushed around." A year after the initial confrontation with Patricia, my business had grown to the point where I needed to make a decision. I could keep it small and home-based, or I could expand and move to a commercial space. It was a good problem to have. I decided to stay in my garage studio. The overhead was low, the work environment was perfect, and I had fought too hard for the right to work from home to give it up now. I did hire another assistant, though, and invested in better equipment that made my work more efficient and even quieter. The annual review with the HOA board, now led by Gerald Thompson, was friendly and straightforward. I showed them my business records, my continued compliance with all restrictions, and letters from neighbors confirming no disturbances. "Jason, you're a model for how this should work," Gerald said, shaking my hand. "You've proven that someone can run a professional business from home without causing any problems. Hell, you've probably increased property values by showing what's possible in this neighborhood." "I appreciate that, Gerald." "No, I appreciate you. You taught this board an important lesson about fairness and following the law. We needed that wake-up call." As I drove home from that meeting, I reflected on everything that had happened. The stress, the anger, the fear of losing my business and possibly my home, it had all been worth it. Not just because I had won, but because I had stood up for what was right. I had forced an unreasonable authority to back down by being prepared, persistent, and professional. My business license was still hanging on the wall of my studio, right next to my home occupation permit and the signed agreement with the HOA. They were more than just pieces of paper, and they were proof that the system could work if you were willing to fight for your rights. I thought about all the people who might face similar situations, who might receive that threatening letter from their HOA and feel powerless to fight back. I hoped that my story could inspire them to stand their ground, to do their research, to get their documentation in order, and to not be intimidated by officials who wielded power but didn't necessarily wield it lawfully. The following year brought more changes to the neighborhood. Gerald Thompson proved to be a fair and reasonable HOA president focused on actual community improvement rather than petty control. He established clearer guidelines for home-based businesses, using my case as a template. Several other neighbors started small home businesses: a graphic designer, a consulting engineer, a freelance writer. The neighborhood didn't descend into commercial chaos as Patricia had predicted. Instead, it became more vibrant, with residents who were more engaged and satisfied with their lives. I ran into Patricia one day at the grocery store in downtown Beaverton. She was in the produce section, and we made eye contact before either of us could pretend we hadn't seen each other. For a moment I considered just walking away, but something made me approach her. "Hello, Patricia," I said neutrally. "Mr. Daniels," she replied, her voice still cold but lacking the sharp edge it once had. "How have you been?" She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something in her expression that might have been regret, though it was hard to tell. "I've been fine. Retired from the board, obviously." "I heard. Gerald's doing a good job." "Yes, well." She paused, seeming to struggle with words. "I suppose I should say that I was too harsh with you. I still don't think the board was wrong, but perhaps we could have handled it differently." It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was the closest Patricia Henderson was probably capable of giving. "I appreciate you saying that," I replied. "For what it's worth, I never wanted to cause trouble. I just wanted to keep doing my work." "I know," she said quietly. Then she turned back to the produce, and our conversation was over. As I continued my shopping, I felt a sense of closure. The battle was truly over, not just legally but emotionally. I had no lingering anger toward Patricia or the board. They had been wrong, but they had eventually done the right thing, even if they had needed legal pressure to get there. My business continued to thrive. Sarah Garrett, my first assistant, graduated from Portland Community College and started taking on more complex projects under my guidance. My second assistant, a man named David Harris who had carpentry experience but wanted to learn fine furniture making, brought skills that complemented my own. Together, we created pieces that were gaining recognition beyond just local customers. A furniture design magazine based in Seattle did a feature article on my studio, focusing on the story of fighting the HOA and building a successful business despite the obstacles. The article brought in more customers and also prompted several emails from other home-based business owners who were facing similar HOA challenges. I connected each of them with Marcus, who was becoming something of a specialist in HOA law as a result of my case. Marcus told me he had taken on 3 more cases similar to mine, all in different Oregon communities. "You started something," he said over beers one evening at a pub in Portland. "HOAs are realizing they can't just bully people anymore, at least not when it comes to home-based businesses. The law is changing how these disputes play out." "Good," I said. "Nobody should have to go through what I went through just to work from home." "Well, you made it easier for everyone who comes after you. That's worth something." 2 years after the confrontation, I was invited to speak at a small business workshop hosted by the city of Beaverton. The topic was navigating regulations and restrictions when starting a home-based business. I talked about my experience with the HOA, emphasizing the importance of documentation, understanding your legal rights, and being willing to fight for fair treatment. During the Q&A session, a woman raised her hand. "What if you can't afford an attorney? I want to start a home business, but I'm worried my HOA will give me trouble and I don't have money for a lawyer." "That's a fair concern," I acknowledged. "First, do everything right from the start. Get all your permits and licenses before you begin operations. Document everything. Read your HOA bylaws carefully and understand what restrictions actually apply. If you do face a challenge, there are resources available. Oregon has legal aid societies that can help with HOA disputes. Also, many attorneys like mine will work on contingency or reduced fees if they believe you have a strong case." Another person asked, "Do you think HOAs serve any useful purpose, or should we just get rid of them?" I thought about that question carefully before answering. I think HOAs can serve a purpose when they focus on legitimate community maintenance and improvement. The problem is when they become about power and control instead of service. Good HOA leadership makes decisions based on what actually benefits the community, not on personal preferences or rigid adherence to rules that don't make sense. My HOA is actually better now than it was before my dispute, because it forced them to examine how they were operating and make changes. After the workshop, several people came up to thank me and share their own stories of HOA disputes. I realized that my experience, as stressful as it had given me a platform to help others navigate similar situations. That felt meaningful. 3 years after the initial confrontation, my business had grown to the point where I was making 6 figures annually. I was working with clients across the Pacific Northwest, and I had a waiting list of several months for custom pieces. Sarah had become a full partner in the business, and we had expanded the studio to include what used to be my backyard shed, all with proper permits and HOA approval. Gerald Thompson retired from the HOA board, and Susan Martinez became president. One of her first initiatives was to create a home-based business advisory committee to help residents understand the process for getting approval for home businesses. She asked me to serve on the committee, and I agreed. The committee met quarterly to review applications from residents who wanted to start home businesses. We evaluated each case based on objective criteria: compliance with city regulations, potential impact on neighbors, and adherence to HOA standards. In the 2 years I served on the committee, we approved 23 home businesses and denied only 2, both of which involved plans that would have genuinely disrupted the neighborhood with excessive traffic and parking issues. The Meadowbrook community transformed. Property values increased, partly because the neighborhood became known as friendly to young professionals and entrepreneurs. The sense of community improved as well, with more residents engaged in interesting work and willing to contribute their skills to neighborhood projects. I sometimes reflected on how different things might have been if I had just given up when Patricia Henderson first showed up at my door. I might have lost my business, or at least been forced to move it somewhere less convenient and more expensive. The neighborhood would have continued under Patricia's authoritarian leadership. Other residents with dreams of home businesses might have been discouraged from even trying. Instead, by standing my ground and fighting for what was right, I had created positive change that rippled out beyond just my own situation. That was the real victory, more significant than any individual battle I had won. Marcus and I remained close friends, and he continued to handle occasional legal issues for my business as it grew. He told me that my case had become a reference point in Oregon HOA law, cited in several subsequent disputes. "You're famous in a very niche area of law," he joked. "HOA attorneys all know the Daniels case." "I'm honored," I said dryly. "That's exactly the kind of fame I always wanted." But in truth, I was proud of what I had accomplished. Not just building a successful business, but doing it the right way and standing up to unreasonable authority. I had proven that being prepared and knowing your rights could overcome even entrenched institutional opposition. My studio had become more than just a place where I made furniture. It was a symbol of persistence and the importance of fighting for what you believed in. I had a photo hanging in the studio from that first HOA hearing, with all my documentation spread out in front of me. I kept it as a reminder that preparation and principles matter. Young furniture makers sometimes came to visit my studio, drawn by the articles that had been written about my work and my story. They wanted to learn techniques, but they also wanted to hear about standing up to the HOA. I always told them the same thing: know your rights, document everything, and don't let anyone tell you that you can't pursue your dreams just because it's inconvenient for them. As I approached the 5-year anniversary of that first confrontation with Patricia Henderson, I took stock of everything that had changed. My business was thriving beyond anything I had imagined when I first converted my garage into a studio. I had helped other people navigate similar challenges. The neighborhood was stronger and more vibrant, and I had learned that sometimes the most important victories come not from avoiding conflict, but from engaging with it thoughtfully and strategically. The studio that Patricia had called illegal was now one of the most respected small furniture operations in Oregon. My business license, the one she had dismissed as insufficient, had been airtight all along, and when pushed to actually defend their position legally, the HOA had backed down because they knew they couldn't win. That was the lesson I took from the whole experience. Bullies, whether individuals or institutions, often rely on people being too intimidated to fight back. They count on complexity and legal-sounding language to make people feel powerless. But when you do your homework, understand the law, and stand firm on solid ground, those bullies have no choice but to back down. I continued my work, creating beautiful furniture pieces and mentoring the next generation of craftspeople. Every day I walked into my studio was a small victory, a reminder that I had fought for the right to do work I loved in the place where I lived. Patricia Henderson had tried to shut me down, but my business license was airtight, my documentation was thorough, and the law was on my side. In the end, they backed down, just as they had to, and I kept building, kept creating, kept proving that with preparation and persistence, you could stand up to unreasonable authority and win. That was a lesson worth sharing and a fight worth having fought. The story of my confrontation with the HOA became part of the neighborhood lore, a tale that new residents heard when they moved in. It served as both a warning to the HOA board about overreach and an encouragement to residents that they had rights worth defending. The Meadowbrook community was better for the conflict having happened and been resolved fairly. As I finished a custom dining table one afternoon, running my hand over the smooth cherry wood surface, I felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond the craftsmanship. This table would grace someone's home for generations, and it had been created in a studio that I had fought to keep open. Every piece I made carried that story with it, a quiet testament to the importance of standing your ground when you know you're right. My business license remained hanging on the wall, a simple document that had proven to be far more powerful than Patricia Henderson ever imagined. It was airtight, just as I had always known it was. And when tested, it had held firm against unreasonable opposition. That was all I had ever asked for. The right to do honest work in my own home without interference from those who couldn't see beyond their own narrow vision of what a neighborhood should be. The sun was setting over Beaverton as I locked up the studio for the night, satisfied with the day's work and grateful for every day I got to do what I loved. The fight with the HOA was long over, but its lessons remained. Be prepared, know your rights, document everything, stand firm on solid ground, and never let anyone tell you that you can't pursue your dreams just because they find it inconvenient. That was how you won against unreasonable authority. That was how you protected your livelihood and your passion. And that was how one person, armed with nothing but the truth and good preparation, could face down an entire institution and emerge victorious. My studio was legal, my business license was airtight, and they had backed down. That simple truth made all the difference.